is the great show for the people.
Top 3 walkout songs of all time. Go. Number 3, Vanilla Ice, Too Cold, Chuck Liddell.
You threw me off with Vanilla Ice, man.
What?
But that is gorgeous.
Do you remember which version that is, though, of Ice Ice Baby?
I didn't, but I do now.
You want to tell them what happened before the podcast?
Boy, I tell you what, we went down that that little shoot of videos, and Vanilla Ice Too Cold came on, and man, the introduction was great. Why don't they do that anymore?
Gorgeous.
Oh yeah, coming up, the smoke. Oh, yeah, it was good.
People think it's like WWE now. That shit was full on. That mask entrance. This is scary as hell.
That was good.
I don't know what the hell was happening.
That was really good.
And it's so perfect too because it's so UFC, like the 90s rap metal.
That could not be more on the nose of 90s UFC. That is Face the Pain mixed with Vanilla Ice. Can you think of anything more 90s UFC?
I said we bring that back. Just like we still have Face the Pain. Why can't we have that?
I'm absolutely on board with that.
I agree.
All right, number 2. Roy McDonald comes out to Rihanna, We Found Love. Gorgeous. Now true story. I want to say we were at this fight when this happened. And I hated him up until this point. Now, this song comes on, and I'm like, I love this man. I absolutely love this gentleman.
By the way, how fickle are we that we change our opinion on a fighter based on one song?
That happens a lot, I would say. When we're watching the fights, they come out to a decent song. I'm on board again.
Yeah,
I'm on
right
board.
back.
Well, isn't that how we judge fighters that we don't know at all?
Oh, absolutely.
When they make their debut, whatever they come out to, that's who we side with in that particular fight.
Oh, especially if we're a few Stevie Weisers in. That absolutely is what happens. Everything's based on that. I can change. I can abandon my favorite fighter based on someone else's music if I've had enough drinks. So
Zach and I, our wives base their favorite fighter off the size of their chest and the color of their skin. The darker the color of the skin, the more they think they stand a chance of winning.
Perfect.
We base ours off their
entrance music.
Which is why our parlays are in the garbage.
Always fail.
All the time.
Yeah, every fucking time. And number 1, the reason we're here today, Anthony Smith, Return to the Mac. Mark Morrison, gorgeous.
I was hoping for a long gorgeous from The Godfather.
Don't worry, there's gonna be plenty of those today.
And we left out Sakuraba, and there's some honorable mentions that go in there for sure. But
this is literally Taylor and I realizing as we walk in that we both have been listening to Return to the Mac all day, and then it's just immediate. Is this the best walkout of all time? It's hard to question it.
It does work. That's right. So anyway, this is MMA Untold. The man you just heard from is the Godfather with his list of amazing walkout songs. And next to him is the scrappy one, Zach Gratton. I'm Taylor Gabriels. Thank you guys for listening today. We are talking about, of course, Anthony Lionheart Smith. And if you didn't know, on March 2nd, for the first time in his career, Anthony Smith will fight for a championship title in the UFC's light heavyweight division. A significant moment for any fighter, but this isn't just any old fight. Smith will have a chance to become the first man to defeat the greatest light heavyweight of all time, Jon Jones. Of course, Smith will be a heavy underdog, and few outside of Smith's inner circle thinks he stands a chance at winning, but none of that matters to the man they call Lionheart. For Smith, this is just another fight in an already storied career, one that includes over 40 professional fights, a fatherless childhood, and a series of poor choices that nearly cost him his life. And as for Jones, well, he's just a body standing between Smith and the dream he's been chasing for 13 years.
You know, the UFC, the story they tell you leading into fights like this, it's all about Jon Jones and his legacy. And there's a lot of talk about these PEDs, the drug use, everything's wrong with Jon Jones, but we are here to tell you this man's journey because just like you laid out right there, this is an insane journey that's been going on for 13 years. The highest amount of fights I've heard in a long time. Was it 60, 70 fights or something?
Between amateur and pro, absolutely.
Absolutely crazy. His chin still seems to be intact. You know, he's all there, and he's going to bring it. And I just think it's really awesome, again, to be here and provide this story because, you know, look, truth be told, I watched all the embeddeds. I watched all the countdowns, and they just don't do a great job on it. This once again of going through his true backstory. You
No.
know, it's all
Yeah,
about
and
Jon
those
Jones.
embeddeds, they really focus on kind of like what's going on during the fight week.
Yep.
Like they're not doing anything. They're trying to like relax. They're just fine tuning some things. They're not doing much. You speak heavy underdog. He's up there with Rose against Joanna, and he's up there with Holm against Rousey. Like he's that plus 550 right now, and
that'll probably
it'll probably swing a little.
more.
Yeah, you know, like
I think if he wins, you got to put him in the conversation with Matt Serra in terms of greatest upsets.
Upset.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's the problem with this fight week. That's been the only story. It's been about how it would be that Buster Douglas moment, that big time underdog beating. And that is an awesome story. And those are the ones that do live on forever. But we just want to make sure that even if that doesn't occur, there's also an amazing story here of Anthony Smith and his journey along the way. And look, truth be told, Jon Jones haters, we want Anthony Smith to win. We did a QD not too long ago where I said Anthony Smith was the fighter I was looking forward to the most this year.
Mhm.
But even if he doesn't win, he's an awesome guy, and it's a crazy story, and we want everybody to know it, either way.
Yeah, it's absolutely a story worth telling. So we'll start at the beginning. Anthony Lionheart Smith was born in Corpus Christi, Texas, but grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, home of the legendary band 311.
Whoop!
Nailed
I'm
it.
out. I'm out.
Gorgeous!
Why do I come back to this? I don't understand.
And now we know why we're here.
It's ridiculous.
This guy
This is really why Tim
from
wanted
Nebraska.
to see him fight. Yeah.
This is the return of the Mac.
So are you upset that he doesn't come out to 311 then?
It hurts a little bit.
I think, like Chuck Liddell, 311 should do a Return of the Mac version,
Oh my
and he should
love
come out to that.
this.
What do you guys think?
Can we use the Patreon money to finance that? Can we help him out? Like a little nudge?
You know, I do like a lot of songs, like metal rock version. They're just not heavy enough. Sorry.
What, are you talking about 311?
Yeah.
How dare you? One. I mean, no, he's right. I mean, I can't really dispute that. Did you hear when them and Offspring like switched? They did down and
Yes, I did.
it was interesting.
It was,
Didn't do it
yeah.
for me, but
No, it didn't. It's okay.
I'm trying to be
They
gentle
can
here.
do no wrong.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. Well, anyway, Smith's mother and father would separate when Smith was 4 due to his father's drug and alcohol abuse. And Smith and his sister were then raised from that point forward by their mother and grandparents. And Smith's grandfather became a hero to Smith at an early age. But around 15 years old, Anthony's grandfather was diagnosed with throat cancer and passed away just 6 weeks later. A tragedy the young teenager was not prepared to handle.
It was a really brutal situation. They only had the 6 weeks notice, and they watched him die. He could never really come to terms with it. Anthony's mother, the grandfather, was too big for her to carry, so he had to kind of carry him around as he kind of faded and everything. And they said Anthony, it would just absolutely tore him apart, and that he never really truly addressed it. And that's devastating,
Yeah, and that definitely is, especially at that young of an age. And I would say it hit him even harder because of all the help that he had to put in for that. And he was a hero for him. Man, watching somebody deteriorate like that, it's rough. It's really bad.
They say that a lot. They talk a lot about when you lose someone, is it harder to see them deteriorate or to lose them suddenly? And that's a really big debate. And this is a case study in why it hurts to see him deteriorate.
And it's a little bit of both here because he watches him deteriorate, but it's a very short amount of time.
You're right.
So it's not like he was watching his grandfather die for 5 years and had plenty of time to process it and prepare for it. They got the news, and 6 weeks later, he's gone.
Well, and people really have to understand, and I know you mentioned it, but he had seriously become Anthony's almost like a surrogate father. This is when sometimes people struggle to understand that. We had a friend who, very similar situation, where not his father was absolutely in the mix, but his grandfather really raised him. And, people didn't understand when he lost his grandfather how much that hurts, because you just think of your grandparents and maybe you're not in the same situation. That can be very difficult. That is essentially your father. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it would really impact Smith. He would end up excelling in school at things like football and wrestling, but his academics quickly fell by the wayside. And according to Smith, it wasn't intelligence that he lacked, but motivation. School simply wasn't a priority, and the structure it demanded from him turned him away. And the only thing keeping him in school was wrestling. But when his grades fell and his partying increased, Smith was kicked off the wrestling team. So at age 17, midway through his senior year, with no wrestling to keep him there, Smith dropped out of school.
A lot of people, when they hear stuff like this, myself included, I get really critical and think like, oh yeah, okay, it was you just didn't try. That's the old like, your buddy gets a D on an exam and he's like, I didn't give a shit, I didn't study, I could have got an A. Mm-hmm. But it is worth noting here, again, not to continue to reference growing up in our scenarios, but Taylor, we went to school together, and we knew people like this. Obviously, they'll remain nameless here, but I can think of one specifically who was brilliant, and he just did not care. And when you spoke to him, he was highly intelligent, and he would just bomb on shit all the time, sleep through class, and you're like, no, it exists.
You can just tell him it's me you're talking about.
Hey-o! Damn it!
No. Well, and keep in mind the time frame here. So actually, there's a little bit of a discrepancy. So Smith says in most interviews that his grandfather passed away when he was 14. There was a recent ESPN article that just came out, and Smith's mother says it happened when Smith was 16. So in the part that I said that he was 15. So I'm sort of bridging the two, assuming it hits somewhere down the middle.
Hey, MMA media, can we stop with this shit?
I know it's never consistent.
And I could be fucking this up, so just call me out if I am. But even when we get to the major incident he has later with an accident, one says he ends up in a ditch, another says he hits a house. And I'm like, which one is it? Is it both? Can we get the story right, guys? Some of us are trying to do a fucking podcast.
I guess the only thing I could say is I probably lean towards the mom being the more accurate account of this because he was a teenager. I don't remember what I did 10 days ago, much less
that's fair.
20 years ago. So it was probably around 16. But either way, he was a sophomore, junior, kind of in that age range when this happens. And he's doing the normal high school stuff, but he takes it a little further and he's partying more and he gets put into an alternative school or alternative class. And it had nothing to do with his intelligence. But like I said, his grades were falling, so he got put in that. But he actually thrived in that environment because it tore down some of those structured walls for him, and it allowed him to be a little more free. So he actually was doing okay. But then senior year comes, he's partying even more, and then kicked off the wrestling team. There's nothing keeping him there.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember too, at that age, your mind is like in its prime of developing. So like so many things can happen. So to have what happened with his grandfather, that takes a piece of that away almost, and just kind of it takes a lot to get back on track. So that alternative school, not because of his intelligence, but it helped him because the structure was different. Well, everybody learns differently.
I don't mean to go back to when he was 4, but you just brought it up, and I think all the time. My daughter is a toddler, almost 4, not almost 4, but soon here. And I think all the time, everything I do, I think about the impact on my daughter. Like, again, just being safe, anything, driving, anything I'm doing, I'm always very careful because I'm like, man, my daughter, it's everything. When you leave, even just to go out of town for the weekend,
has no idea.
Go to work, it was the cutest thing ever. Actually, when we went on vacation, my daughter's last words to me is she said, because she goes, Dad, drive slow so you don't bump into any other cars. And I was like, that's adorable that's the last thing she says because it's so important. So think about, in this case, when he's that age, his dad left and never came back. He got kicked out, but that is going to affect you forever. So he has that trauma at age 4, and they're very intelligent. My daughter's 3, very intelligent. So he knows what's happening then. And then again, whether he's 14, 16, he deals with trauma again when he actually loses his grandpa. That's tough, man.
Yeah, so he would continue to party and would get into a lot of fights. And the officer in that ESPN article talks about him constantly ending up in, like minor jail, if you will.
Yeah, a lot of times. Like, didn't he set the record or something for possession once?
So he's partying, he's getting into fights, and he just really has no real direction now that he's out of school. And until one day he comes upon a flyer at Subway.
I want to stop you right there because everybody has come across a flyer or a little raffle at Subway. Everybody has their own story. Like I used to go there and it'd be like, oh, just sign this little thing and get a free month at the gym. And everyone does it. And then everyone gets the call that they want. And you're like, guys, it's a fucking scam. And Subway always has some little flyer or raffle, something. I'm so glad that even Anthony Smith, there's a lot I can really relate to this sometimes with his music, this.
That's good. Yeah. So the flyer was for an amateur fight night, and Smith and a couple friends attended the event initially as spectators, but that all changed when one of the fighters fell out of his fight just minutes prior.
Well, and this is the first time of many that Anthony is going to jump in. He's a bit of an opportunity. He's very smart like this on the short notice situations, takes advantage of it, and this is how his whole career starts, essentially. And it works for him, so...
Yeah, so at no point had he ever fought except just in street fights and things like that. But he decides to, on very short notice, take his first amateur fight. And seemingly, I think he may have ended up losing that first fight. He borrowed a pair of gym shorts from someone in the arena, maybe from his buddy. I can't remember who. Borrows a pair of gym shorts and then just goes in there to fight. And... then he falls in love with it.
See, this guy goes to Subway, gets a flyer, ends up in a goddamn cage fight. I go to Subway, go to the video store, pick up a video game, and go sit my fat ass on the couch and play some video games all night. I'm a fucking huge loser.
What kind of sub do you think he got?
Ooh, okay. You think there was at least one or two?
It's got to be meat.
He's a big boy.
Right? He's a big guy.
100% meatball. I'm a steak and cheese guy, but I can't. Ooh.
No, I'm going. Well, okay, so he's in.
He's got 3 meats.
He's in Nebraska.
Okay, Asiago bread for sure, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can just rule that out immediately.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Okay, just checking.
What do you eat in Nebraska at a Subway? What do you think is it like a cold cut trio?
There we go. The old grilled chicken teriyaki. Is that beef still around? I don't know. Yeah, maybe we'll go.
He might. I think he's a teriyaki guy or a cold cut trio guy.
I think he's getting 2. He's a big boy. Yes. Or he's getting the chips and the cookie.
He's getting both. The meal plus one.
Well, he wasn't cutting weight at this point.
Exactly.
So that's a strong possibility. So yeah, he takes this fight, and then from there he starts training jujitsu out of some old guy's garage or the back of some old guy's house. He said.
Perfect. This is straight out of an 80s movie. Some old guy's garage.
Yep.
Can we do an episode on that old guy? Who was this gentleman?
Mr. Miyagi?
Who knows?
Did the article? I hope the article literally said some old guy's garage.
More or less, that is what he said. The back of some old guy's house. He didn't even give the guy's name. So yeah,
perfect.
Some old guy. And then he fights in bowling alleys, strip clubs, and the like. But fighting didn't pay, so to earn an income, Smith had to work as a concrete finisher at DC Concrete, a job he would keep all the way through 2016. And I know he ends up working at a glass company as well, but he's a concrete finisher, glass installation guy, that kind of stuff.
I feel like everyone with the sport, everyone's always saying it's like this, like, it's like the human cockfighting, and it's always like, like it's a dirty sport, and then everyone, the media, us ourselves, we're always like, it's bullshit. No, it's this clean thing. It's regulated. And then Anthony Smith and his backstory are like, hold my beer. Listen to this shit. I'm fighting in fucking bowling alleys, strip clubs. And everyone's like, see, we told you. We promise it's not like that anymore, guys. Listen.
I was trying to think, like, maybe we're just not in the right circles with this kind of stuff, but like, are there amateur fight nights somewhere?
No, it's not at the bowling alley.
You don't talk about it, I guess. Not the bowling alley you went to.
The bowling alley I went to.
You went on a Saturday night, shut down, boys. What?
It was just me slamming cheese fries. It was the most aggressive thing going on there.
Slamming cheese fries and throwing 6-pound balls as fast as you can.
Yeah.
It's my style. I like it.
So yeah, he would fight 20 plus times in a span of 2 years, and he would win 14 of those straight by armbar. But it would take 3 fights before he would even start training in this old guy's,
Wait, did you say 14 by armbar in a row?
In a row by armbar.
It's a regular Ronda Rousey.
Hey, man. What's going on here? Try to steal his cheese fries, so he snapped it in half? All right.
He was on, I think he was on Undisputed in August, and he talked a little bit about it and said maybe it was that episode or a different one, he was joking with Matt Serra that he didn't even know what an armbar was or what any of those things were initially, and he didn't know how to tap. So when he started training the jiu-jitsu, he got put to sleep. He got his shoulder dislocated because he didn't even know what tapping was. He didn't know you could opt out of, going forward with it. Yeah. So he just, he learned that way, learned the hard way.
Talk about going straight in the deep end. Like, he was just, all right, when you train, you go out, he's thinking,
hey, like,
life or death.
Isn't that the first thing you learn? Hey, old guy, you're losing some credibility here, man.
This old guy is tanking right now.
What's going on?
Don't worry about that, man. I really hope by the end of this episode, we can give that man a name.
Yeah, maybe we can do a follow-up and really find this guy and do an episode on him.
I hope so. Well, after 2 years of amateur fights, Smith finally turned pro at 19, winning his first 3 fights. And what Smith lacked in formal martial arts training, he made up for with heart, eventually prompting one announcer to deem him Lionheart.
Well. And if you read further, it is in fact based on the movie Lionheart, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, which is the sweetest fucking movie ever. And watch your fucking mouth, Zach. And and it is specifically said it's because he'd be in these grimy fucking fights and then he'd pull off a slick finish, just like my hero, Lionheart. It's amazing. This Anthony Smith's the fucking man. And if you haven't seen Lionheart, grow up and go watch it.
I was just going to say you could drop your diapers line because I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, it's so good. It was one of my all joking aside, when I found this out, I was so fucking excited because Lionheart was one of my first favorite movies that when you would start having sleepovers with your buddy and stuff and he'd be like, it was back in the St. Charles days, but way back in the day. And I just remember watching that shit. We used to watch it every fucking night. I'm sure it does not hold up, but don't bring that up.
It almost definitely doesn't hold up.
Don't bring that
That's
up.
okay, though. A lot of things happened back then that were perfectly
so
acceptable,
good.
like Chuck Liddell's entrance. That just maybe not so much
It's
today.
so
I
good.
don't know. It's debatable. But despite Smith's strength of will inside the cage, there were demons in his life that would get the better of him, nearly pushing him to the point of death.
Yeah, so man alive. So he did a little drinking as we talked about. And one night he's partying until he remembers up until 6 a.m., but he parties all the way up. This occurs at 11 a.m., right? And he parties all night and he's driving himself home and he goes off into a ditch. Like we said, the articles are conflicting, but it sure sounds like when the police officers, the Brett Okamoto article says it was the police officer says a ditch. So let's go with the police officer. Ends up in a ditch. He's unresponsive. And when he finally comes to, he says himself, he's hammered. So they have to put him out, right? Because he's just going crazy. Because imagine that. I mean, for anybody that's had an irresponsible night and blacked out, when you wake up, you're like, what the fuck is going on? And imagine how terrifying that would be to wake up in a ditch with police. And the last thing you remember is 5 hours prior. Absolutely terrifying. And then, there's some really emotional stuff. I don't know if you're going to go into it, Taylor, when at the hospital.
Well, no, I'll let you kind of talk about that. But this was one of the things his friend says in that article was that he constantly got blackout drunk.
Yep.
This is a bigger guy. And what was his blood alcohol content?
Oh my God. It was like
0.295.
Yeah. It was 0.295. It was
so almost 0.3.
Yeah. Which is borderline
absurd.
can kill you.
That's almost alcohol poisoning.
And he's out driving around like that.
And I guess he used to, in an irresponsible way, do that a lot. Damn. So he would drink to the point of blacking out and he would drive.
And listen, this is fucking terrible shit. And it's indefensible. We've talked about the trauma in his life, but nothing makes this okay. But in a true, test of his character, and this really shows the type of person he's going to become in the hospital when he's there and he wakes up. And all he can do with his mom is send text messages. They're standing next to each other, but they're sending messages on the phone because he can't communicate because he's got a tube down his throat. And, I think the very first thing he says is, did I hurt anybody? And so even in that moment, he's not thinking about himself. He is thinking about others. And this shows what he becomes. You know what I mean?
You mean he didn't metaphorically hit a pregnant woman and flee the scene?
Yep. I
He
mean,
actually
seriously, right?
Was asking to see if someone was okay.
Absolutely
Got
right.
it.
He took responsibility when no one was asking.
That's another thing they say in that, and we keep referencing that same Akamoto article, but that's another thing that the police officer says is that was one thing whenever he got busted or in trouble, he always at least owned up to what he did and took ownership of it and accepted the consequences.
And that's really big for us. We talk a lot on this podcast about
Integrity.
our issues with Jon Jones is because he doesn't own up to things. Like I mentioned before, I did watch a lot of the build up for this fight, and Jon Jones continues to drive me fucking insane because he's so fake. He's doing the good guy thing again. Anthony Smith, I love he's openly, not in any way jump to the Jon Jones fight, but I love that he's openly like, look, I'm not talking about his accidents and stuff. He's like, I'm no better than him, and that's fucking awesome. So he's got character through and through here.
I think it goes to show we like the characters and we like the fighters of who kind of maybe show and share the same values. And you can kind of, it's no different than you could tell what kind of person he is based off that. You could tell what kind of fan someone is when we're having a conversation with them versus when we bring up Jon Jones, all they can think about is how much they hate DC, but the reasons why aren't there. You know what I mean? So I think we share the same values. We may not do the same things that, what happened, but at that age when you're irresponsible, who's stopping you?
Yeah. And there's a clear distinction that needs to be made here, especially for any newer listeners. We are very aware of the greatness of someone like Jon Jones. If we don't like a fighter as a person, it doesn't mean that we diminish or dispute their, efforts and actions inside the cage. We're very aware that
we judge them completely differently.
Absolutely. And look, I know that most of the great athletes out there are not great human beings in any sport. Most of the greats are not really good human beings. But that's okay. We can like certain fighters for their actions outside the cage, and we can appreciate other fighters who we don't care for. We can appreciate their greatness inside the cage. It's okay to make that distinction. You don't have to jump on Jon Jones' bandwagon just because he's great if you don't like who he is as a human being. But the opposite is true as well. You don't have to discredit someone's abilities just because you don't like them as a fighter.
Absolutely. Look no further. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And the most glaring one in combat sports is someone like Floyd Mayweather, who is despicable and we can't stand. But there's no denying his
brilliance.
He's brilliant inside the ring. And we watch to see him lose, but we watch nonetheless.
Absolutely. So Smith would recover from the accident, and just 1 month later, you heard that right, would return to fighting.
Sir, weren't you like down and out for weeks or some shit? Didn't you have some injury or surgery? Who were we talking about that got somebody got hurt and you brought up your injury or some shit? Was that who got hurt? A few was this a year was it Mir? Who when they were in middle school spent time in the hospital? Do you guys remember?
I think that was Zach. Yeah.
Oh, was it you that was down and out? Were you injured? It was you.
I was.
Because of football.
Yeah.
Imagine taking a fucking fight a month after that. I thought of you when I heard this immediately. No. Again,
I'd fully recover.
That's what it was. You. I knew one of you was down and out. Imagine a month later, by the way, stepping in the cage with a fucking killer.
I broke my pinky finger playing basketball in 2 places. I was out for 6 months.
Perfect.
I did not step back on that court for a while.
No, yeah, it took me a long time.
Yeah.
When I busted my knee, when I busted my ankle, my knee was 4 months, and my ankle was at least 2 months. It's nuts.
It's just crazy.
And let me add one more detail to this story. I believe he was airlifted to the hospital in Omaha from the accident scene because his family talked about having to drive to the hospital where they were taking him.
Yep.
And what they were feeling as they were driving there. So it's not like he had this big accident and came away with a scratch. There was some serious injuries here.
Very serious.
1 month later, he's fighting. But
what a madman.
But he would lose 2 fights in a row after that accident.
But this is why I love him, though, because this isn't all great. It's he comes back, oh, that's amazing. He fights a month later, and he loses. But you know what? He's not fucking deterred. He just keeps coming back. He's relentless.
Yeah, he loses twice in a row, but then he snaps that 4-fight skid, by winning, I don't even know how many in a row, 12 of his next 14 fights after this 4-fight losing streak. So he gets treatment for his drinking, and he begins talking to prison inmates in an effort to, as he says, pay it forward. And as luck would have it, soon after he picks up his first win after the accident, he also meets his new girlfriend and becomes a father. This
is really the turning point for him. And as you can tell with the way we talk about our kids on this podcast, I mean, I can totally relate that that's lights a fire under your ass having a kid. And this is his defining moment here. You're going to see a definite turn in the way he handles everything. And that's really good on him, because I have met people in the past, they always say that your kids get you to mature very quickly. Some people just fucking don't. They are irresponsible parents.
Yep.
He steps right up to the fucking plate here and changes everything. So pretty awesome. And he was, to be fair, he was changing leading up to this when you were talking about that, a paying it forward thing with the inmates and stuff. He's really showing some good signs here of his character.
You know, yeah, definitely. I think that's the biggest part of his growth too, is paying it forward and like going and taking the time to speak to individuals who don't necessarily have that freedom. So that's huge. That speaks volumes.
Well, I think that there's a throwaway line in there too, that he sought treatment for his drinking.
True.
He says he wasn't an alcoholic. That wasn't the issue. It was just that alcohol was a coping mechanism,
exactly,
dealing with something that
everything
happened years
that
prior.
happened.
Yeah. So again, this takes first, before any of this, it takes admitting something and stepping up and facing that head on, accepting responsibility, and then seeking to correct that action. Yep. And it leads to all these good things, but that's where it starts.
Yep.
It didn't just come about. He had to make that effort.
Well, and it's almost him finally dealing with those demons, right? You know what I mean? Like from when he lost his grandfather, he never truly addressed that. And once again, we can all relate. You know, I know somebody recently who went through a loss and didn't cope with it and basically just had to take a huge break and be like, I need to go deal with this. And if you don't, look what can happen. I mean, Anthony Smith almost killed himself accidentally, you know what I mean? Because his drinking had gotten so out of control.
Yeah, look, the fact is, when tragedy happens, no matter when it happens in your life, if it's significant enough, you're going to have to deal with it or cope with it one way or another.
Yeah,
he coped with alcohol.
And initially. I'm really glad you pointed this out, Taylor, because you're right. So many times we do this in these podcasts, and
it's never going to go away.
Yeah, right. There's these throwaway lines, and you're just like, yeah, he goes and fixes it. But you're like, that's a battle for him. That's a choice he has to make. He has to come to terms with it. He does, and that changes everything.
Yeah, and to Zach's point, some people never do.
Yeah, exactly.
They never deal with it, and then they end up having some issues down the road, and we won't talk about a fighter that's been talked about recently, because that's not what episode we're doing. But anyway, Smith would go on, as I said, to win 12 of his next 14 fights, including 2 finishes in Strikeforce. But Smith's story isn't one of all roses and rainbows from here. After losing his next fight to Roger Gracie, a fight Smith claimed he was on his way to winning until Roger poked him in the eye, the UFC would then absorb Strikeforce, and along with it, Anthony Smith. But Smith's time in the UFC lasted less than 2 minutes.
Here's another one of those setbacks, right? We always come across these in these stories. He gets his big moment, which people would just think that's crazy that he ever made it to the UFC in any way in the first place, because he had to be winning in Strikeforce to get that opportunity to be brought over. And he gets leg locked or whatever it was, knee bar, whatever. I don't remember, it was a knee bar or leg lock in a couple minutes, and he's done. Pretty much. Then didn't he just get like the immediate go fuck yourself from the UFC?
Yeah.
Thanks, but no
see
thanks.
You later.
Yeah.
His coach says, how devastating that was, because you work your whole life up to that moment. 2 minutes gone.
Took the words out of my mouth. Imagine working your whole life for that, and you get that big moment, and 2 minutes later, on like a bit of a rarer, fluky submission moment, it's like, oh, by the way, thanks for everything, but see you later.
In such a sport that anything can happen too, and in 2 minutes it's gone. Like, man.
Well, Taylor, you've talked in the past about what it's like for writers when they spend a year or two writing a book and it doesn't get published, how devastating that is. Well, his journey was 13 years or whatever. Imagine that. I mean, that's even worse.
Oh, it's horrific. And it's not the same situation, but I think of Kat Zingano in this situation, finally getting to Ronda Rousey and just lasting seconds, making one ill-advised thing to start the fight, flipping, rolling, and then you're done.
This was just the anniversary the other day, so it's been blowing up our Twitter feed, and it's heartbreaking to see that. I've made sure to go away from it every time because Kat, obviously, as we've discussed ever since we did that episode, she's just a top favorite. I know, Taylor, you always loved her, but that's when I really got into her, and I'm like, oh my God, she's so good. And now, this is not what this episode's about, but now knowing Ronda's limitations, now I really do subscribe to the what would have happened if she hadn't have thrown that fucking knee, and that's crazy to think that.
And she'll never get another chance.
We'll never know.
That was it.
That was it.
Fortunately, Anthony Smith would get another chance, but
nice work.
I want to thank you
because I was having a fucking meltdown over here.
Well, I do want to give a quote from Smith around this time when he was talking about this, because he loses 2 fights after that, and he has 2 injuries around the same time he loses those fights. And he speaks of the situation and says, quote, "I was a little soured with the sport as a whole. This sport can tear your life apart if you let it, and I had let it a little. 2 fights, 2 serious injuries resulting in 2 losses. All of my eggs were in one basket. I worked for 7 years to get to the UFC, and it wasn't that cool. I considered retiring heavily. After some time, I realized that I had taken the fun out of it because I put so much pressure on myself. I had to win, and I ruined it. I work full-time now and train full-time. I don't have to win. I just want to. It's been a long time since I just wanted to win that bad, and that makes me much more dangerous."
Does that remind you a little bit, I know on a completely different level, but of the stuff we've talked about in recent episodes with Anderson, the relief of winning his title, or of not having to defend his title anymore, or George when GSP stepped down and was like, I can't take the pressure anymore. It sounds like that to them it had become a stressor and not fun. And with him, with Anthony Smith here, he had made it not fun for himself anymore in a different way. But he had to kind of take a step back and make it fun again.
Well, going back to the writing thing, I can absolutely relate to this, because when I started out writing, I would read all of these articles of people like Stephen King and all these different writers that would lock themselves in a room for 6 months, looking at a blank wall, and just bury themselves in their writing. And there was something to be admired there, but there was also a little bit of a warning there that even if you love something, it becomes a job and it becomes something you're required to do. And I know myself, I joked about the alternative school and stuff earlier, being smart and having no motivation. I knew myself, even just starting in writing, I was aware that would lead to bad things for me as a writer. I needed to find joy and passion in what I was working on. If it became a chore, it was going to take all the fun out of it. And then it was going to be something I didn't want to do and certainly would never succeed at. So I made writing happen when I felt compelled to do it.
Absolutely. And look no further than even the beginning of this podcast when we used to discuss like, oh, what should we talk about on a QD? And then we'd go over like the typical MMA conversations like, oh, should we do a top 5 list of this or that or do that? And we're like, okay, should we talk about if Mighty Mouse is the GOAT? And we're like, no, because it fucking drives us crazy and that feels like a chore. Well, let's just sit down, and if we bore people talking about movies or, TV for a bit, we'd rather do that and then drive ourselves fucking insane because I can't sit here and do a top 10 GOAT list or some shit. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It affects everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So with his new outlook on the sport, Smith emerged from his losing skid by rattling off 7 wins in a row before finally being invited back to the UFC. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere.
Oh man! So this streak, my favorite fight during this streak is that goddamn Hector Lombard fight, because I was not familiar with that and what had happened, and I thought so during this. So I guess in the build up to this fight, Lombard had said something along the lines of like he didn't know who Anthony Smith was, and so Anthony Smith is like pulverizing him, and I believe it's before the 3rd round. He's just yelling, and it's great because you read it in the article, but then when you actually see the clip, you're like, oh yeah, maybe they pick up on a mic that he says like, do you know my name now? No, he's screaming across the cage, do you know my fucking name now? Or do you know my name now? And I'm like, yes, this is awesome.
That's scary. That is really scary. Like, that's petrifying. Like, do you know me now? Like, man. Dude, yes.
And then
Relax.
You put yourself in Lombard's head where you're like disrespecting this guy for months and he honestly doesn't know who he is. Lombard's supposed to be a really big deal and you're getting your ass beat and he's screaming at you, "Do you know my name now?" I'd be so embarrassed.
I hate to bring this up, but I can't help but think of the Conor Khabib.
Yeah, no, that's true.
You know,
that's
I can't
fair.
help but think of like, it's just business, man. I just see Hector Lombard like, I was just trying to hype up the fight, man.
Well,
Relax.
knowing Hector Lombard, he was not.
He
just trying.
definitely
That's
was
the
not,
problem.
but that's okay.
Knocked out 4 training partners along the way, probably.
That's probably true. And then, do you remember the last fight before getting invited back to the UFC after he wins? He puts on that "Call Me Dana" hat.
Which is awesome.
That's so
See,
smart.
This guy, you know, we've been talking a lot here about how he's a very smart guy, and that shows he gets it. You know, Mickey Gall has made his career on him. There's like one call out that Dana White saw on a show. What was that? A tryout for the Contender Series or looking for a fight?
It was looking for a fight. The
Okay.
YouTube series. It was the first season. He saw him and he was like, "I want to fight CM Punk." While he was in the cage octagon, he said, "I want to fight."
But
CM
did he
Punk.
know? Didn't he know Dana
knew.
was going to be in the audience?
Well,
that
yeah,
night?
he knew,
right?
But you take that opportunity.
Yeah, no,
and
it's
he
brilliant.
flourished. And now he's in the UFC. Sure, he's winning some fights. He just lost, but like, man,
He's fighting on this card.
still
Oddly,
fighting.
Yeah, he
Diego
is oddly
Sanchez.
fighting
He's
on
got
this
a
card.
high-profile fight, and it just shows that in that situation, he knew Dana was there. Anthony Smith doesn't even know if he has any eyes on him at all, and he still has the wherewithal to put that hat on.
Where do you think Bellator is with that? Like, is that against? Because you'll never hear like Bellator
great.
brought up on UFC. You'll never hear UFC brought up, but like, you're literally going out to the president with a hat on a
They
different.
would shut that shit down. That's a great question. But
Well,
they
you're
would.
going down a little bit of a rabbit hole that Tim and I talked about maybe a couple months ago, because I was saying that the UFC should be more open with. They literally won't even mention or acknowledge the existence of these other organizations. And I asked you, Tim, on the phone, does that happen in WWE?
Oh, yeah. And
Remember,
it's
we
recently
had that
they have a top
conversation.
competitor now, and they're doing the same thing. They have this new top competitor called AEW, and anybody that shows up in the shirts to their events, they're booting them they're either making them change their shirt, and if they won't, they're kicking them out. And again, that
And then
just
what's-
fuels the fire.
What's
That-
the other
The other one's
organization
openly
doing?
coming out and tweeting like, by the way, you can wear whatever you want to at our shows. We don't care. And again, that just fuels the fire and gets people more interested.
I think it's just the arrogance of the people up top.
Yeah.
Like, if Dana's not the president, I think it changes personally.
It's possible.
Yeah.
We don't know.
I mean,
but
they
that's
still
certainly possible.
use Mike Goldberg's like voice on. He's in the game. He's in like some of the promos. Like they still use him.
I am a
and he
walking-
does not work for them.
I'm a walking meme right now. I'm just sitting here staring off into the distance. Fucking hello, darkness, my old friend, because I miss Goldberg so bad. I miss him so bad. Please come back, please.
All right. Well, things were going as well as they ever had in Anthony Smith's life. He had established himself as a legitimate contender in the 185-pound division. He had 2 more daughters at this point, and he had earned enough money to quit his day job. But once again, Smith was on the verge of killing himself. This time, it wasn't partying or lack of focus that was the problem. It was the opposite. Too much focus.
Well, he's moving his way up the ranks here, and he gets to the Santos fight, and these weight cuts that he's going through to make 185 are brutalizing
he is a
him.
big dude.
You know, he does an overnight weight cut, which to me is rare. I haven't heard that very much. And that one just drained him. And man, hearing his stories, and we talked a lot about weight cutting during the Cyborg episode, but man, like the symptoms he was experiencing in these weight cuts. And I'm a fucking weirdo about my ears, right? Like I always, like if I get water in my ears, if I'm on a plane, I'm like chewing gum the whole time, like 50 pieces, because my ears freak me out. Well, did you read about his ears during the weight cut? Holy shit. So he says that like his ears pop during his weight cut for no reason. His ears pop horribly. And so like when he speaks, you know, how, like again, your inner voice, like when you hear yourself speak, gets off when your ears are plugged or not plugged. he says like it would cause us delays in the way he would hear himself speak. So when he'd be starting the second sentence, he'd still be hearing the tail end of what he said in his first sentence. So he'd shut down and stop talking.
Good God.
It's horrifying. Yeah, it's really scary stuff. And again, a lot of like really bad back pain. I can't remember what other symptoms. The ear thing has really got me.
Well, and he was staying up, right?
All night
long to cut weight.
Correct.
The day before the fight.
Weighing in the morning, then trying to get a little bit of sleep before the ceremonial weigh-ins, and then trying to get anything corrected he can that night, get any sleep, rehydrate before the fucking fight. So he goes into this Santos fight, a complete shell of himself, and it's an exciting fight of the night, but he gets knocked out. It's a kick, I want to say, to the body.
To the body.
Very fitting, considering a lot of the issues he had with his stomach, back.
And I'll just say, too, Santos is a big individual as well. He is also now moved up since because of the weight cut as well.
Yeah.
So, like, it's really damaging. I know, like, Josh Berkman, he's a lightweight. Dude, he cut 20 pounds in 24 hours. Like, it's not
Just
like,
well,
that's
that sounds
crazy.
like what Anthony Smith
yeah,
is doing
that's
here.
so
Yeah.
that's what I think of, and it's, man, what it does to your body. And that's the thing, though. Wrestlers, he was a wrestler. He cut weight for some reason. It just sticks with them. They think they can cut that weight still, and they can't. Johnny Hendricks, he's a wrestler. It's just,
And let's keep in mind, this is 41 professional fights into his career.
Yeah.
He's not even 30, and he's had 41 professional fights and at least 20 amateur fights. So we're talking about a guy that has fought 60 plus times, not including street fights. We always joke, you and I, Tim, about the Nogueira brothers looking 25 years older than they are. And we love that. I love both of them. They're the nicest guys. But in fighting years, they look like they're 100 because they've been around for so long and they've taken a lot of damage over the years. They haven't fought a combined 60 something times.
Yeah. And he's just putting his body through the ringer, man. Over and over again. That's brutal. So he decides he gets finished in this fight, and him and his team take a step back, and they're like, listen, we're not doing this, because it's the easy way out. He's just like, look, this doesn't work anymore. They basically looked at who he was in the gym and the version of him that was showing up on fight night, and it was two different people. And they're like, this is a fucking joke. Forget it. So he decides to move up here, and what's super interesting, and we give the UFC a lot of shit, but they took the data from his fights and the way he trains at the Performance Center, and they compared it to the other lightweights, the other lightweights, holy shit, the other light heavyweights, and they basically presented to his team and said, look, you are in the top 3% as far as strength, athleticism, power, you name it, for 205, for light heavyweight. And they're like, you should go up. And he's like, oh, shit. So to anybody, by the way, that thinks he's some small 205er here as this run starts, no, he's actually top 3% of all time. And this is where this 12-1, 14-1 bullshit against Jon Jones, you got to be careful with that stuff. I know, we all know the writing's on the wall here, what could happen in this fight. But the dude's top 3% for the metrics they track at the UFC Performance Center. They're presenting to him saying, by the way, you're a 205er.
Yeah, that's important information. It's something they should be putting out there to show that, this is
Where
a
is that
legitimate
information
contender.
right now? Where's that information right now in the marketing for this fight? Why do we have to just insist on relying on the Rocky story, which is a great story, but hey, the guy is a freak athlete in his own way. Jon Jones is the top one ever, not even a percentage. He's probably the biggest freak athlete in the history of the UFC, but this is a top 3% at 205. That's amazing.
Yeah. It at least needs to be discussed
Yeah.
and talked about. It really does.
So no, he moves up.
Yeah,
and
then
tragic things happen.
And then just 4 months later, Smith would make his light heavyweight debut with a 53-second knockout victory over the former light heavyweight champion, Rashad Evans. And we'll just pause for a moment of silence.
Oh man,
Zach, don't you dare open your mouth to speak.
listen, I understand the love that you guys have for Rashad, but we witnessed that fight, and it was it was good. I mean,
I don't know why you have to say it that way.
Okay, it wasn't good, but it was good in the tune that I think you became a big Anthony Smith fan after that. Did you not?
There were some glorious moments that came out of that. So first of all, an all-time moment. Well, first of all, Anthony Smith comes out to Return of the Mac, and I'm doing some real soul searching. Hayes is with us, because I'm immediately, like we talked about beforehand, I had plenty of Stevie Weisers at that point, and I'm highly questioning what's going on, because now I'm like, all right, I love this guy. Hayes, his all-time favorite song is Return of the Mac, so he's all in. He's completely abandoned us, so we're fucked. We're down one guy, because he's all in on Anthony Smith. Then the all-time classic moment, so Hayes is all in on Anthony Smith. I'm questioning my life. And then you go, you remember what you said?
No, I don't. No.
You go, why does this guy look so scary? And I'm like, you're right. This guy looks like he's going to murder Rashad. Because we were not very familiar with Anthony Smith. You know, again, a bit of a problem with the UFC because we watch, between the three of us, every single fight. I don't think we've collectively missed one in a 13 years.
No, we had seen him fight. We just really didn't.
Right, but they don't.
Yeah, we didn't know who he was.
He just blends in. And at that moment, when you said, why does this man look so scary? We're all like, oh no. And then very unfortunate things happen.
And I said knockout, but there was a little discussion before the podcast.
A lot of controversy. We almost didn't record because Zach was trying to call it a knockout. I was saying TKO. The fucking film was out. We're doing the back and to the left, pointing to everything, the full show.
Back and to the left.
And to the left.
A clown.
Reviewing the film, literally.
Exactly what we are, a bunch of clowns.
And we did settle on a knockout. Zach, you won that argument.
Unfortunately,
that last.
I still need to review the footage.
It really is the last punch. If you look close, Rashad goes out. It's really unfortunate. But this is a pivotal night for Anthony and MMA Untold because at this moment we're like, holy shit, I kind of like this guy. I want to see him fight somebody else now.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're open to that. You can beat one of our favorite fighters, and we'll jump on board if you're a likable guy.
Yeah.
You know? We don't have any problem doing that.
Coming out to Return of the Mac.
It is a tough pill to swallow, but there are some things that help that pill go down, like Return of the Mac. So from here, Smith would finish another former champion in Mauricio Shogun Rua, followed by a submission victory over the surging, heavy-handed Volkan Oezdemir. And after nearly 14 years of fighting, Smith had finally earned his chance at UFC Gold.
And these two fights that you just brought up here, these are both reminiscent of the beginning of this, almost like the way he got into fighting, because he steps in on short notice or just to fill a spot. I mean, look, when they're putting him in there against Shogun to headline, he's just a body. The UFC brass, and I do want to say, may not have been in Brazil, but it was overseas. And again, that's a Shogun night. They're putting Shogun in there against somebody they think he can beat, so the crowd can leave happy. And Anthony Smith reigns on the parade. And then Oezdemir, I want to say that was Gustafsson's fight. I think Gustafsson and Oezdemir were supposed to fight. I could be botching that, but they removed Gustafsson because they ended up deciding they were going to do Jon Jones, and they needed a replacement. And he hops on in and just ever the opportunist, and then nails it, just submits him.
And he jokingly credits Michael Bisping for prompting him to speak out against Jon Jones, I think after that fight in like an interview, but really beating two former champions and then submitting Oezdemir, who's right there. I think he was ranked number 2.
He was a title challenger.
Who's right there in contention. You earn yourself a shot at that point.
Look, not everything in this business has to be these champ super fights. You know, I have to listen to the MMA media question this fight and say it's a stay busy fight, it's a tune-up fight for Jones. Listen, that's the same media that was applauding Mighty Mouse for fighting the next guy up. Okay.
Yeah, even number 9.
Number 9. Right.
What the fuck?
And Jon Jones has been gone so long that the next guy up is number 3 right now. Okay, that's not a bad thing. It's totally cool. We're all excited, and if it means Jon Jones fights every 2 to 3 months or something right now, that's awesome. So let's do it, man. Let's just have a straight up title fight between the next guy up and the champ. I don't fucking get it.
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So
this room just got set on fire.
It did.
We were like all calm and we all got fucking furious.
Well, let's go into our takeaways from this episode because as you said, until we saw him fight Rashad Evans, we didn't know a thing about Anthony Smith. Yeah. And since the Rashad fight, we've jokingly come to like his entrance. We like a lot of things about him, but certainly after doing this research, we have a much better understanding of Anthony Smith. So what did you take out of this episode?
Well, and look, just to the fans out there, to the listeners out there, like it is an abrupt run here. This 205 run is 9 months long. Because you were like, wait a second, 2 minutes ago he moved up in weight, and now we're to the Jon Jones fight. Well, yeah, that's kind of how it happened. I mean, he beats Rashad.
That's what happens when you fight more than once a year, though.
Very smart. Company man, jumps in when they need him, finishes people. Again, it says all the right things. And then I want to say he's shown up at a desk or two as he started. I want to say he did at least one event. Not like
he's done. He's done
a couple.
He's done a lot of desks.
Very well spoken. It's a good look for the company. He's a company guy. Fights whenever they need him, and boom, they reward you. That's the way it should be. It's the way it used to be. And that's okay. So just I want to close that portion off with saying, like, yes, the UFC run is brief because the truth is he mopped the floor with 2 completely washed legends, but that's okay. Those are big names, and that's how you get the Ozdemir fight, and that's where everybody thinks the ride ends, but it didn't. He beat Ozdemir, and he went into deep waters with Ozdemir and still beat him. So here we are, and so obviously the Jon Jones fight is an exciting one, but my takeaways heading into this Jon Jones fight, I fucking love the story, man. I mean, it's just an awesome story. He perseveres through seeing those traumatic events like we went over before and all of his setbacks throughout his career over and over again. I mean, he has a 4-fight losing skid in the middle of that. And one of the articles says he runs into a writer at the airport, and even in the middle of the 4-fight losing skid or whatever, he's like, I'm going to be in the UFC. I'm going to be champion, whatever.
That was the MMA junkie.
Yeah, he believed in the middle of a 4-fight losing streak on the regional scene that he was going to make it to the big show. And even the writer's like, yeah, okay. Yeah, all right. And then the best part is the UFC, or the writer interviewing him later when he's in the UFC, like, you did it, dude. So his belief in himself is awesome. And just these are the stories that, all joking aside about his music, the name Lionheart and everything, these are the ones I love because the UFC has handled it appropriately. This isn't like Tyron Woodley where it's this amazing story and the UFC's botching it. The UFC's giving him his shot. And we spend all this time as fans of people like Chris Lieben just going like, man, it'd be fun if Lieben got a title shot. We all know. And I said this with him. It'd be cool to see what happens, okay? And is it 12-1, 14-1? Yeah. Is he a heavy underdog? Yeah. But hey, man, as soon as I hear things like athleticism, top 3% all time for light heavyweights, sign me up. Take my money. I love it.
I think what really stands out is I always try to look at them as a person, and that generally always stands out. And one word that describes Anthony Smith to me is he's a realist. And what I mean by that is, he had his issues with alcohol growing up. He realized he needed to get some help. So he got it. And what he does that I've seen, and you guys can jump in if you have, I don't think I've seen a fighter do this before defeat. So like not someone owning defeat and saying they were a better fighter, but before defeat or before a fight, Anthony Smith came out and said, Jon Jones is a better mixed martial artist than I am. He said it flat out, but he's not a better fighter. And he distinguishes the two, and he gives you that explanation. And I just to me, what fighter do you know will ever say the fighter they're facing is better than him at something? Other than someone fighting GSP, obviously his wrestling's better. But openly admitting that yes, he's a better mixed martial artist, but I'm a better fighter. Not only is he a realist with the whole situation, and he comes to terms with things that maybe he can't control, but he also still has the confidence to say that. And to me, that just stands out. And I just think overall, his integrity as a person,
and to your point, I think that fucked with Jon Jones a little bit, because if you see the clip on the countdown of Jon Jones, they show him that quote, and it sets Jon Jones off.
Of course it does.
And
am I surprised at that? No.
And he says things like, oh, that, that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. That doesn't even make any sense. And you're like, yeah, I know that bothers you, because I know that after fights like the Gustafsson fight, Jon Jones says things like, thank you for letting me, test my warrior spirit. I think he does. Jon Jones has come up from behind. He's usually a front runner, right? He usually does great, but he has definitely shown the ability to come back now a couple times. But I think that bothered him until things like the Gustafsson fight. He wondered if he goes into the trenches, can he come out on the other side and win? And when Anthony Smith says that, it's like, by the way, you're not a fighter. You're a martial artist, but because then Smith's like, let's get in a fight. Like, let's do it. And you just wonder, is he kind of egging him on, and he's going to get him to just go in there and throw bombs?
And one thing that I'm curious to see is his wrestling is not bad. So on the ground with Jones, will it get to that point? I don't think so. I think it's going to be a stand-up battle all the way through. But, man, it's going to be something to watch.
Well, I guess I would echo, some of the things both of you guys said. I do appreciate his realistic look at things, his honesty, really.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about one of the reasons we joked about a moment of silence for Rashad is we appreciated Rashad's honesty as a fighter. And I can really appreciate Anthony Smith's honesty. And he's able to make a distinction like I did earlier with fighters that we like as people, but versus ones we don't like as people, but can appreciate their athleticism. Anthony Smith is able to understand, I can't knock Jon Jones for what he does in his personal life because I've done it too. He's very honest about that. Mm-hmm. He says he's a better mixed martial artist. He's very honest about that. But he can make the distinction of just because I'm willing to say you're better than me at something doesn't mean you're going to get the better of me that night. And I can really appreciate that honesty. I appreciate him turning his life around. We've seen that with a lot of fighters that we've covered on this program. But yeah, there's something nice. This is a very simple story, but it's one of somebody coming up through the trenches, making mistakes along the way, learning from them, and eventually getting to this point where he has a chance to, like I said at the beginning, not just fight for the title, but fight the greatest light heavyweight and possibly the greatest fighter of all time. Who could you want to have that happen to more than a guy like this? It's amazing.
You just never know. Robbie Lawler was a journeyman for a long time. Was he a highly touted prospect when he was in the UFC? Yep, but that didn't work out. And then he was an up and down fighter, fighting on the outskirts, the strike force, you name it. And he comes all the way back, and you're going like, yeah, this is fun, but when's the ride going to end? Like, oh, they're feeding him to Rory McDonald the first time, and then like, oh, wait, he wins. Wait, what? And oh my God, he keeps making his way up. And I remember even when they had him fight, I want to say it was Koscheck right when he came back, and you're just like, oh, well, he's going to get wrestle fucked.
Weren't we at that fight?
We were at Rory. Were we at Koscheck? I think we were at Rory.
We were at Rory, but Koscheck fought Woodley on that same card. That's what I'm
always thinking about Tyron Woodley. But no, so he just... and I've totally lost my train of thought because now I'm on the Tyron Woodley train. But I'm so glad it's only fitting that we've derailed with Tyron Woodley. But no, along the way, something happened with Robbie Lawler is what I was getting at. And he made his way all the way up. And you go, well, yeah, he's only in this title fight because GSP is gone. And then he wins the title. You're like, yeah, well, he won't really defend it. But it's been fun. And then he keeps winning. And it keeps being fight of the year. And all of a sudden, you're like, damn, dude. Robbie Lawler's a fucking legend. And that run is legendary. And everyone will remember that. And I'm not just going to take his neck, I'm going to take his soul or whatever is like an all-time line. And you're like, damn, that was fun. And it's what we watched this for. That's what I pay to see. Why can't Anthony Smith be that too? Okay. Now I understand that Robbie Lawler didn't have to beat GSP. Okay. So I get it that it's different, but you never know how these runs end. And I just don't know why we can't have fun with it in a sport that is so frustrating and exhausting to be a fan or do a podcast about. They make these dumb decisions all the time. Sometimes this is just fun. Like, take my $60. Like, let's do this.
What were we saying going into the Jon Jones Rampage fight? Same thing, man. Rampage has a puncher's chance. He's got a lot of power if he can catch Jones on the chin. Did we say Rampage is going to out-wrestle Jones? Rampage is going to submit Jones? Rampage is quicker? Rampage is smarter? No. He lacked ability in every single area of combat against Jon Jones, just like Anthony Smith does. But all it takes is one. And that's fun sometimes. Just to watch and hope and think about the different possibilities. That's fun. And we can do that here.
We were genuinely excited for Derek Lewis Cormier. And we all knew the score there. We all knew what we were getting ourselves into, right? He's better at one thing. He has a puncher's chance. he can Black Beast can land one, and we all signed up for that. And you know what? I don't regret watching that pay-per-view. And this is no different.
No, and I want to make one final statement here. No matter what happens in this fight, if Anthony Smith goes out in the same fashion Black Beast did against Cormier, if he goes out and loses in the first round in 2 minutes, it's okay. Because he still, by his own efforts, brought himself to that place. He still earned that opportunity, and he still got to live through that opportunity. And it doesn't matter. If he loses in 2 minutes, it does not matter. I'm happy that he got there, and he deserves to be there.
I think that's the thing, right? Not only is it good for business because now he's a bigger name. So let's say Jon Jones does wipe the floor with him, okay? Well, now he's a bigger name. He can be a gatekeeper, and he can make money for a long time. On a personal level, and that's what we're here for, he has gotten his chance to live his dream. He is now a name in the UFC, and if he brings it to Jon Jones in any way, he's going to continue to be on main cards of pay-per-view or headlining fight nights, and he's going to get to provide for his wife and 3 daughters, and ultimately, that's what he really cares about. That's what this is all about for him.
Well, that's what and it goes back. He's a realist. That's all that matters.
So this is a true win-win. So to everybody in the MMA media who's shitting on this fight, shame on you. This is an awesome story, and let's just see what happens.
All right. That'll do it for us. Zach, you got anything else before we kick out of here?
I'm good.
All right. Well, 2 men fighting inside a steel cage isn't for everyone, but stories like Anthony Smith's are. This is MMA Untold. If you didn't know, now you know.
We were watching that.
Put it right back. I want to see if the sniper killed the clown at the mall.
If we slow it down, we can actually see the bullets enter and exit Buttercup.
Ew.
Gross.
Back and to the left. Back and to the left. A clown.